You're listening to Short History Shorts audio, where history speaks louder than images. Towering beasts armored for battle, the clash of tusks and the thunder of hooves. Few images evoke the might and exotic menace of Carthage's military machine like the war elephant. These massive creatures, drawn from Africa, trained with brutal discipline, and driven into the heart of ancient battlefields, were the tanks of their time. They smashed enemy lines, terrified horses, and turned the tide of battles with sheer psychological and physical force. But what was the real story behind Carthage's war elephants? How were they trained, deployed, and ultimately defeated? The story of Carthaginian war elephants begins with the wider legacy of the elephant in ancient warfare. India and Persia had long used elephants as symbols of kingship and tools of conquest. But it was the Hellenistic world, after Alexander the Great's campaigns, that brought elephant warfare into the Mediterranean mainstream. Carthage, watching and learning, adopted and adapted this strategy to suit its needs. Their elephants were typically the now extinct North African forest elephant, smaller than their Indian counterparts but still massive and powerful. Standing about 2.5 meters tall at the shoulder, they were strong enough to carry armored towers with archers or javelin throwers, and to trample infantry with deadly force. These animals were sourced from across North Africa, Libya, Tunisia, and possibly even Mauritania, and brought to Carthage through an extensive capture and transport network. Training began early. Elephants were conditioned to tolerate noise, smoke, weapons, and humans. They were trained to follow commands from mahouts, their personal drivers, who steered them using hooks, words, and leg pressure. In battle, the mahout often carried a chisel or hammer to kill the elephant swiftly if it went berserk, a grim but necessary failsafe. Carthage's use of war elephants expanded dramatically in the 3rd century BC, particularly during the Punic Wars against Rome. In the First Punic War, elephants were shipped to Sicily by Carthaginian generals like Hanno the Great, but rough terrain and Roman adaptation limited their effectiveness. They were more psychological than strategic at this stage. However, it was during the Second Punic War, Hannibal's War, that elephants entered historical legend. In 218 BC, Hannibal famously led a contingent of elephants across the Alps in one of the boldest logistical feats in military history. The crossing was brutal, and many elephants died. But a few survived to fight in the Italian campaign. One elephant in particular, named Surus, possibly Syrian and of exceptional size, is said to have been Hannibal's personal mount. Elephants played critical roles in some early battles in Italy, especially in intimidating Roman forces unaccustomed to them. However, their tactical use was always complex. In tight terrain or forests, elephants were liabilities. When frightened or wounded, they could trample their own lines. Roman commanders quickly learned to adapt, opening their ranks to funnel elephants through, targeting their legs, or using skirmishers and incendiaries to provoke panic. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, the climactic end of the Second Punic War, Scipio Africanus anticipated Hannibal's use of elephants and arranged his troops in corridors to absorb the charge. The elephants panicked and turned back into the Carthaginian ranks, helping secure Rome's victory. This moment marked the beginning of the end for Carthage's elephant corps. But even so, Carthaginian war elephants were more than just battlefield weapons. They were symbols of imperial reach. They represented Carthage's mastery over nature and its command of African resources. No other Mediterranean power fielded elephants with such regularity. They were often used in ceremonial parades, military processions, and even diplomacy. Their sheer presence conveyed awe, wealth, and intimidation. Archaeological evidence supports their importance. Elephant bones, carvings, and coins from Carthage show the animal as a cultural icon. Elephants also appear in Roman propaganda, often as defeated symbols of Carthaginian arrogance. Rome saw the elephant as a symbol of exotic savagery, and Roman generals who defeated them were celebrated for overcoming the monstrous and the foreign. But Carthage's elephant force was not invincible. By the time of the Third Punic War, 149-146 BC, elephants had largely disappeared from its battlefield toolkit. Rome had adapted too well. North African elephants were increasingly scarce due to overhunting and ecological pressure, and Carthage, under siege and desperate, focused on defensive city fighting rather than mobile warfare. The days of thunderous elephant charges were over. In the end, Carthage's war elephants became a cautionary tale in military innovation. They were awe-inspiring but inconsistent. They required vast resources, delicate training, and perfect battlefield conditions. In open terrain with unprepared enemies, they could be devastating. But against agile, organized foes like the Romans, they became blunt instruments in a precise game. Yet, even so, they left their mark. The memory of Hannibal's elephants haunted Roman literature for generations. Poets, playwrights, and historians described their power and strangeness. In the Roman imagination, Carthage would always be the land of elephants, of strange beasts brought against them in war. And in our own time, the image of the war elephant still stirs the imagination, a living tank, ancient and terrible, symbolizing a lost empire that once challenged Rome for control of the known world. War elephants were not the secret to Carthage's success, but they were a vivid, unforgettable part of it. They reflected the creativity and risk that defined Carthaginian strategy, and though they could not save Carthage in the end, their legacy still marches on through history's most powerful imagery of ancient warfare.